For your final activity, you're going to explore, does order matter in addition and subtraction? So the first thing you're going to do is answer this question on your slide. Does the order of the numbers matter when you're adding? What about subtraction? Why or why not? Okay. And then you're going to work through and solve these problems, where if you notice, our questions are flipped. So we have 3 minus 2 and 2 minus 3. Remember your rule from adding and subtracting, okay? So we'll skip down, do a little bit of tougher one. We'll do negative 1.2 minus negative 3.6, okay? So remember our keep change flip, KCF, very similar to how we do dividing fractions. Okay, so I'm going to keep this number, change this to an addition, and I'm going to flip this to the opposite, which is a positive. Okay, so this tells us that negative 1.2 plus 3.6 is the same as negative 1.2 minus negative 3.6. Okay, so now we can go through and solve it. So we know if we have different signs here, we have a positive and a negative. So we're going to subtract. So we're going to do 3.6 minus 1.2, which is, let's see, that's 0.4, that's 2.4. Okay, and then we're going to take the sign of the larger number. Negative 1.2, positive 3.6. 3.6 is a higher number, so therefore our answer is 2.4. Okay, and then we're going to come over here and solve one, but that's flipped. Okay, so in this case, negative 3.6 is first. Okay, so remember our keep, change, flip method. So we're going to keep, change this, and flip this to a positive. Okay, so now we have negative 3.6 plus positive 1.2. Okay, that tells us, again, that's the same as negative 3.6 minus a negative 1.2. We have different sides. Goodness. So we are going to subtract. So 3.6 minus 1.2, we already know, is 2.4. So it's not letting me draw it on here. But anyway, so we know it's negative 2.4. And then we're going to take the sign of the larger number. And in this case, our larger number is 3.6. So in this case, it's negative 2.4. So if you notice, our answers have come up different. So that's important to think about, that when we're subtracting, that you cannot just flip the numbers, that they're not the same both ways. So I want you to go through and solve the rest of these off to the side, fill in your answers in each of the boxes, and then you can check your work on the next page. In subtracting, that leads us to two very important words that you will see on your mid-unit assessment. The first being difference, okay? We've worked with difference before. In fact, in our first activity, it talked about difference. Difference is the idea of subtracting numbers, okay? And you really just subtract it as you read it. Okay, so really it depends on their order. You just subtract as you read. So a great example is this. What's the difference between the height in a 14-foot monster and a 20-foot monster? Okay, so if we're talking about difference here, we're not going to do 20 minus 14. We're going to subtract it as we read it. So in this case, we're going to do 14 minus 20. Okay, keeping our keep, change, flip. Keep this, change this to positive, or adding, and then we're going to change our second number to the opposite, which is negative, okay? We have opposite signs, so we're going to subtract. So 20 minus 14 is 6, and our bigger number is 20, so our answer is negative 6. So the difference in height is negative 6 feet, okay? Again, You subtract as you read it. This is very, very important. Even my accelerated kids were having issues with this because they just wanted to do 20 minus 14, which is not the case. You must subtract as you read it. 14 minus 20. So again, notice the 14 is first. That's because it's first in the problem. Okay. And using that information, I would like for you to answer this question. What's the difference between 10 and 12? The second word that is very important is distance. Okay. And we talked about this in our first lesson. The idea that if I'm standing 4 feet from Edwin, Edwin is 4 feet from me, not negative 4 feet. So distance is always positive. So if we look at that same question again, what's the distance between a height of a 14-foot monster and a 20-foot monster? We would do our subtraction. 14 minus 20 is -6. But because we're talking about distance here, the answer is always positive. So just the big thing to remember is when you see distance, you should always think positive. Always positive when it comes to distance. Using that information, I want you to solve this question here. What's the distance between 10 and 12?